What's going on here?
What?
You were supposed to make a bunch of videos this semester, and you made nothing. Heck, you couldn't even edit one video in 3 months.
Listen, man, I'm tired. I don't know if you know this, but it's kind of hard to go to school during a pandemic.
I can do college easily. It's just lame. I'm gonna get famous, and then I'm gonna make a bunch of money boxing people who've never boxed before.
Seems like that's the thing to do these days when you're washed up.
Wow, you're in a much worse mood than I am usually. That's a first. Why don't we talk about that Transistor game you played recently? That should cheer you up, right?
I guess it's worth a shot.
That's the spirit. Alright guys, so I may or may not have filmed the Bastion video in January and then not released it until now, but life happens, so it's what it is. But regardless, I'm done with school for the summer, so I'm back to making regular content, starting with the next installment in my Supergiant Games review series, Transistor. I don't really have any history with Transistor. I got it for free on the Epic Games Store and played it for a few minutes and then stopped, but I went back through it for this video and I kind of have some very mixed feelings about it, so let's get right into it. More often than not, when a game studio creates a successful new IP, they expand on it, usually in the form of sequels. Other times, they'll go on to create something completely new, and on some occasions, they'll do a bit of both. That sort of in-between is where Transistor lies, a game that very much feels like a spiritual successor to Bastion. Both these games share many elements with each other, and yet they both feel very different, but to avoid reviewing Transistor in the context of Bastion, I'm not really going to compare the two till my closing thoughts. Getting into the world of Transistor, the story is very vague, and while you can basically get what's happening without having to seek out extra tidbits of lore, I feel a little more clarity might have been helpful. You play as Red, a popular singer who was recently attacked by this group called the Camerata, which resulted in the loss of your voice. Shortly after the attack, you flee into the streets of the city of Cloudbank and come upon this weird-looking sword thing called the Transistor impaled in a man's chest. Upon removing the device, his consciousness goes into the Transistor, revealing our nameless narrator, once again played by the incredibly talented Logan Cunningham. You are then tasked with seeking out the Camerata to try to get some answers on why they attacked you and what's going on. As per usual, I don't want to spoil anything about the game, but honestly, I don't know if I could explain enough of it on my own to even do that. Just like in the last game, you have to find the story on your own, and though it's easier to do than it was in Bastion, I just didn't really feel like it. It's not like the story's bad, it's just not amazing or anything, and the game kinda almost makes you feel like you shouldn't worry about the details. Because while I have so many unanswered questions, I just don't even feel like I need to ask them, and that's kinda odd. But moving on to the gameplay, that's where things get a lot more clear. If I'm being honest, I didn't really enjoy playing this game a good portion of the time, but I felt like a lot of that was due to my own decision to not try and learn the game's combat system the way I should have. Transistor is a sort of hybrid hack-and-slash turn-based strategy game, but without the hacking and slashing. Though the Transistor looks like a sword, you aren't going to fight with it by swinging it at your foes. Instead, the Transistor functions like a highly customizable gun that's in the form of a massive USB drive-like sword. The weapon customization in this game is really cool. Almost every time you level up, you get to pick a new function for your weapon. Functions can be equipped to one of 4 ability slots as a main attack, one of the 2 upgrade slots per weapon to give that weapon different effects, or to one of your 4 passive slots. You'll have to unlock a good portion of these extra slots by leveling up, but even having the default 1 sub-slot per weapon is enough to get what you want out of each weapon. I found this system to be super interesting and fairly helpful throughout my playthrough. Though you are limited by what slots you've unlocked and a memory cost system where activating a function contributes to a certain amount to a memory limit that can't be exceeded, I always felt like I had the tools I needed to succeed. Except when I didn't, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, like I said, this is a hack-and-slash turn-based hybrid without the hacking. Generally, all of your functions either shoot a projectile or grant you a utility effect like a dash or invisibility. Now, you can go into a fight and start shooting enemies, but you're going to very quickly realize that this isn't the best way to approach any given fight, and that's where the turn-based part comes in. By pressing the right trigger, the game pauses, and that's where things get interesting. During this pause time, you get to plan out an attack and execute it. You have an action meter that dictates what you can do and what is essentially your turn. Moving and attacking both spend a certain amount of your action gauge, and generally, if a function does more damage, it's going to cost a lot more of that gauge. As much as you may want to play this game like a hack and slash, as I did, you need to take advantage of the system because encounters are kind of designed around it. Got a bunch of enemies lined up but can't quite get a clear shot? Pause, reposition yourself, and take them out without having to go for each one individually. Unfortunately, I ended up having to use this as a safety mechanism rather than using it as an offensive tool, but when I did try to use the system more, I was rewarded for doing so. You can't use it all the time because using it puts you on a cooldown from using your abilities while the attack recharges, but if you have the upper hand, that doesn't really matter much.
There's not much more to do besides combat though. There's not really any puzzles or exploration. And though there are these little gameplay challenges in this area that you can access at random points in the game, those are all just fights too, and they only reward you with music. So if combat's the only thing you're doing, then the combat has to be stellar, right? Well, it is and it isn't. See, the combat is where all my complaints from the game come in, so I'm going to skip the issues segments and just talk about my gripes here.
Honestly, my biggest issue with the combat is the pacing. Everything just feels slow, and it transformed the combat from switching between just using your abilities and stringing commands together when it suits you, to basically just running around and waiting for your turn to recharge so you can do anything. You have basically no mobility, aside from a dash which has such a long wind up and wind down that it feels bad to use almost all the time. Enemies pile on very quickly, and are just downright frustrating to deal with, in basically every scenario because you have very few tools to reposition around them or get cover without playing extremely methodically. Another issue is the life system. Every time your health bar runs out, you lose one of your functions at random, and if all of them run out, you have to start over from a checkpoint. Functions can be restored after finding 1 or 2 new checkpoints, but if you lose the functions you're most comfortable with, it's going to be very hard to come out of an encounter alive. Buffs that I wanted on my functions required me to use other functions that were good for attacking, so when I lost that function that I put more resources into, I was left with a subpar attack that I couldn't do much with, and as a result, I only lost harder. In theory, I like this idea a lot, but in the context of the game, I lost my stuff far too often because of the lack of movement options. Later in the game, I got a function called Void that reduced enemy defense, and I found a new combo of stringing a boosted Void together 3 times before hitting an enemy with a boosted Call, which one-shot every enemy in the game. While this was fun to do, I was easily able to defeat the final boss without any effort by doing this, and it felt kinda wrong. There is a customizable difficulty system that lets you buff up enemies in exchange for more experience, but I found that to not be worth the difficulty trade-off in my playthrough and went without it. It's weird that I'm complaining about being OP, but for a final boss, I wish it was just a bit harder at the base difficulty.
I just didn't really enjoy playing this game. I did have some moments of fun, like initially doing that Void Cull combo, but I was just annoyed for most of my playthrough, and that just kinda sucked. Don't get me wrong, I do think there are really cool things going on in this game, but as someone who likes action games and strategy games, I just wish there was a better blend of the two. And I just wish the pacing of the combat was a little bit faster. But enough about the gameplay, let's move on to the art and music.
If there's one place Transistor excels, it's definitely in the visual category. Transistor sports this technology-infused Art Deco style that really works. Though mostly empty due to story reasons, the environments look really good and the colors create a really cool atmosphere. The enemies all look sort of the same because they're all robots from a single force, but I think the designs work pretty well and they look like technology from the Portal games, which isn't a bad thing whatsoever. Red's character design is also really good and the painted cutscenes she's in look phenomenal. I also appreciate the way the sword is used from an artistic standpoint. It's cool to see her slam the transistor into the ground to fire off different attacks, and the way she drags it along the ground is also
That's about all I have to say about that. The art is good, you've seen it, you can make that judgment for yourself, so let's move on to music.
The game's soundtrack is fine, but it didn't really stand out to me a whole lot. Even after listening to it on its own, I just didn't really get attached to any of the songs. I liked On the Coast, and the vocal tracks are pretty good, but overall the OST is just
Wait,
fine.
you're done already? Yeah, I just kind of have a meh feeling about this one. It's a quality experience, I can't argue otherwise, but it just didn't really click with me. Huh. Normally you like every game you review, except for that garbage Kingdom Hearts review you made a while ago. That's because I usually give up on games I don't like very much. And don't you ever bring up that atrocious Kingdom Hearts video ever again. Whatever. Anyway, it sounds like this game shared a lot of elements with Bastion. I'm assuming you like that one more? Yeah, if I had to pick between the two, I'd definitely pick Bastion. Both games are very similar. They're both isometric action games cryptic stories and customizable difficulty and weapons, and narration from Logan Cunningham, but I just like the pacing and the combat of Bastion a lot more. So you think Bastion is better? Well, no. I like playing Bastion more, but I can't really argue which one's better than the other. They're both really quality titles, and they both have something unique to bring to the table. I just think Bastion's a lot more fun to play, and so that's the one I'd recommend. But if you played Bastion and liked it, there is still a really good chance you'll like Transistor too. I just didn't really. That's a lot of words to just say you didn't like the game. I'd be a pretty garbage reviewer if I just said I didn't like something and then offered no explanation. But yeah, I just couldn't really get into Transistor as much as I got into Bastion. Well man, I almost feel a little bad asking you to talk about this game you didn't really like that much. It's all good. I wanted to review all their games and I didn't really know what I was getting into, so maybe the next one will be more my thing. Hopefully you'll like the next one better so I can feel less bad about trashing you in the next one. You know, cool guy, you're surprisingly thoughtful sometimes. Who, me? Nah man, I just don't want to kick a man when he's down. It looks bad for my image. If you say so. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and checking out some of my other content. I plan on uploading every Friday for the foreseeable future, so check back for more if you want to keep up with what I'm doing. Thank you all for watching, and see you all in the next one.